You're getting featured on this channel way too much. All this talk I did about how it's so reliable, and then here I am, I'm doing too many videos on it. It's making this tractor look bad, but it's actually fine. So, welcome everyone. I'm going to be doing what I'm going to call a spring service on the Versatile here because we're getting, well, I say we're getting, we have Milo we're going to plant and see how that does for us. We're going to try something a little different this year, and we need a tractor to pull implements to make that happen. So the Versatile needs just, you know, a basic kind of once over, need to look it over, put some fluids in it, fix a few little things here and there, and that's what this video is going to be about. And then if it looks like it's short enough, I might tie it into the planting, but I need to make shorter videos, so we'll see. But first step here, this still has water and like 1 gallon of antifreeze in it from when I did the oil cooler reseal, and it's still not leaking? Question mark? Oh, no, it's dry. All right. I love it when it looks like I did a good job. So, yeah, I'll drain this, and then I got a barrel of extended life coolant yesterday from the local oil supplier, and I'll go ahead and dump that in. And you'll see how I'm going to do. I'm not going to pick up the barrel. I'm not that strong, but you'll see how I do that here in a minute. And then, you know, we'll change a couple filters, crawl underneath and grease it, check a few other things out. And, yeah, that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So I'm going to get this tube off one way or another because that's the fastest way to drain the coolant. And while that's draining, I'll go put my special hand pump together that I'm going to use to move coolant into this thing. So I'll bring you guys along for some highlights, and let's get after it. Okay, well, that worked really well. Some of you might be concerned about, oh my gosh, you just dumped a bunch of antifreeze or contaminated water, whatever you want to call it, on the ground, and I'm going to be 100% with you. I technically did do that, but there was only like 1 gallon of actual concentrate in there to like 23 gallons of water, so it's not going to hurt the environment, I promise you. I mean, I promise you it's not hurting the environment. There have been worse things spilled on this ground, and it works well. So one thing I did notice, and if any of you are a little more experienced with these engines, you leave a comment and let me know. But on this bottom part of the radiator here, this bottom hose, when I pulled it off, it looked almost black, murky liquid coming out of there. But out of here, it was just barely tinted green antifreeze because I just dumped a gallon of concentrate in here because when I got done with the oil cooler, it was supposed to freeze one night, and I didn't want it to, you know, freeze and crack the engine, so I just put a little bit of green coolant in. But this was just tinted a little bit of green, but clear. I mean, there was no crud in it. But on that bottom there, it was dirty. Now, I stuck the hose in on the bottom here, and I went ahead and rinsed that until it looked like it was mostly clear, but I don't know why it was all dirty. And I thought, oh shoot, is it oil? But if we pull the oil dipstick here, I mean, it's where it should be. It's a little low because I have not put any oil back in it from when I did the cooler. But I don't know, it was weird. So when I got done with this, I went up top to the fill tank, and I opened the cap, and I put the hose in there and just ran some water through here, and it was coming out nice and clear through that port, so I'm happy with that. I mentioned in the oil cooler reseal video that if you get the clamps loose on that L-shaped pipe and you get on it with a block of wood, you can hammer it off. That was just a guess because I thought that would work really well, and it turns out I was right. It worked extremely well. Now, it helps that I had that off before and I'd already broken the seal that the hose had formed to the metal, you know. But that worked really well for getting that loose, and I mean, it made a mess, but it'll dry. We need some rain, and like I said, this ground has had a lot worse poured on it, so sue me. But now that we got that done, we'll go over and see about putting a transfer pump together and filling this thing back up with some good coolant. These look right. Okay, pump all assembled. Dad picked this up yesterday. Now, they say you're only supposed to use it for fuel, but it's going to pump antifreeze. So that's it. It's going to pump antifreeze whether it likes it or not. So I got it all put together. Dad grabbed an extra hose. I had a 3/4 union on hand, which is, it's always nice when I have parts on hand. And they've got it set, and I actually like this because we got a hand pump because, you know, we're farmers. We're not going to do things the easy way. But we've got this set up here where it should pump a gallon per stroke because it's double acting. And this setting here should only do a half a gallon per full stroke. So, well, or full cycle, I mean. So you go back on the setting I have it now, you go back, it'll move a half gallon, and then you go forward, it'll move a half a gallon. And on this setting, it'll do the same thing, just 1/4 gallon at a time. So that's kind of a cool design. They changed the suction pipe to plastic on these. It used to be metal. I'm actually not against this because plastic will not rust. It won't corrode. And if you're not in agriculture, if you don't use these transfer pumps, these transfer tanks, you'd be surprised at how often these damn things rot and fall off in the tank. Even when they still got fuel in them. It kind of sucks. So I'm not going to complain that they put plastic on here. And the housing is aluminum, which I also like for once. And then we should be able to fit this on a 2-inch bung, which should be what the coolant barrel is. That's the theory. So with everything all taped up nice and neat and pretty and all that, and with extra hose, I'll go throw this in the barrel, and then we'll go over to the tractor to see about filling everything up. This is what we're putting in. By the way, got this from the local oil supplier for really not a bad price. And I don't want to say what the price is because, I mean, prices change, and if you're in a different area, it might be different for you, but this is what we're using. So we're going to use the skid steer because, again, I, oddly enough, cannot pick up an entire barrel of antifreeze. And we'll take it over there, get everything hooked back up on the tractor, and get her filled. And this did fit very well down here, so I'm really happy about that, because I was prepared for it to not, but that would have sucked. So we're good. Okay, I got 24 gallons in there right now. I counted the strokes once it started, and when they said that half-gallon setting had more resistance on it, they were not kidding. So I had to go slow, but still in like under 5 minutes, I pretty much pumped this thing full of coolant. So let's go ahead and we'll fire it up for a minute, circulate everything. And I do mean like a minute. And then if it looks good, we'll go ahead and change the coolant filter. So go ahead and get some air moving through here. Somebody been emailing me asking about the shifter, and I basically told him, make sure you go all the way over when you're shifting your gears, and you shouldn't have any problems. But you do have to be careful, because if you don't go all the way over and then up and down because your shifter gets worn, you will get this thing stuck between gears, and that kind of sucks to deal with. But we're in neutral right now, or we should be. We'll find out pretty quick. So I know that wasn't quite a minute, but it should do to circulate coolant. I didn't want to get this thing too hot because I still have to crawl underneath it. but dry there. We seem dry down there. And make sure, yep, that's still open, and that one is also still open. So we should be good. We should be good. We'll go crawl, let's go crawl up there and make sure that we still have enough in the bottle. Maybe I shouldn't have parked the skid steer so close. That should be, unless I have it set on the quarter stroke, but I shouldn't. I should have it set on the full stroke on the pump. So if we get up here, I don't know if you guys can see down in there or not. You cannot, but I can, and that looks good enough to go ahead and run. So what I'm going to do is I've got some old antifreeze jugs. I'll rinse them out really good. And this stuff is pre-diluted, by the way, in case you didn't see that. So I'll go ahead and fill some gallon jugs, and I'll put a couple in the cab, and that way we can check the coolant level and make sure everything's all right. So next, I suppose I'll go grab me a filter, and we'll go ahead and change the coolant filter. Okay, changing the coolant filter is easy enough that I should be able to do it with one hand while the other hand is holding the camera. So the first thing you want to do is shut these valves, which they have conveniently placed, so that when you change this filter, you don't send coolant all over the engine. Also, when you're sticking your arm up through here, just make sure you don't ground yourself out on the alternator. Ask me why I told you that. This one down here is a little stiff. It should be fairly simple. And some of you might throw a fit that we use Baldwin filters, and I do think that there are filters that are better than Baldwin, but for this versatile, for this Cummins, these are going to be just fine. We use Baldwin on almost every piece of ag equipment around here, just because they're some of the cheapest filters that we can get. So next, take your filter wrench. Oh, and it might be stiff. Yep, it's going to want to fight me. Damn you. We're on camera. Don't you do this to me. There it goes. Slow. This is why, man, this is why you do not ever tighten spin-on filters with a wrench. Because, oh, there we go. There we go. All right, now, if we did it right, then no coolant should come out. I mean, we're going to spill a little bit right on the alternator because that's just how Mafia works. Now, let us check. Looks pretty clear. That's what we want. Okay. That has been on there for a while. Go ahead and toss that down in there. I'll throw it away later. Okay, so next, hang on, I gotta open the filter here one-handed. Probably should have done this before I turned the camera on. Should just be able to spin it on. Oops. Okay, well, that's good enough. And what you're supposed to do is get a little bit of antifreeze and run around the edge of that seal, just because, and then pull plastic off, and then as tight as you can, one-handed, and that should be just fine. And if you really want to test it, I mean, you're gonna have to open these up anyway. When you're done, you should be able to open these up, and that should not leak. If it does leak, you did something wrong. Get in here and do it this way. And so, as you can see, this little segment, with me screwing around, I probably could have done it faster two-handed. But even with me screwing around, it only took 3 minutes to change that filter, and I did it one-handed. Really easy, if that valve would just open up the rest of the way. It's really important that you close these when you pull the filter off, and it's especially important that you open them when you put the filter back on, because if you don't, bad things will happen. Again, ask me how I know. I'm not the first person to forget to open the filter valves on a Cummins. All right, so there we go. Brand new. Oop. Yeah, there are units in there. There's some magic science behind it that I researched slightly when I did the oil cooler, but that was over a month ago, and I filled my head with other stuff now. So we're all good there. Next, I'm going to go ahead and change that oil filter. That's pretty self-explanatory. Spin it off, spin it back on. Should you pre-fill it? That's up to you. I don't know that it really matters. I like to pre-fill my oil filters when I can, but my thought is if they made it an enormous pain in the ass to get to them, they probably don't need to be pre-filled. This probably doesn't need to be pre-filled. So, but we'll do that. We'll top off the motor oil, and then we'll probably back this up a little bit so I'm not in the mud, and we'll go crawl underneath and see about greasing this. Okay, before we back this up to the shop, we need to check one more thing back in here while this is still sort of level, and that is this level plug right back in here. Okay, now of course this level plug is for the transmission, because the transmission is a separate unit from the rest of the hydraulic system. And I'll get you guys in here in a minute where you can see no fluid. Okay, we're gonna have to add some. So, small mistake on my part. I made a big boo-boo last year, and I kept adding oil to the hydraulic tank instead of the transmission because I forgot the transmission was a separate system. So that plug is right there off that street elbow. And of course this thing leaks because, it's like a 50-year-old tractor. And so we're going to, oh, look at that. There's a serial number. I didn't know that. How about that? Okay. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. I need to make sure that that's full before I go back this up to the shop and it's on unlevel ground. It doesn't need to be level for anything else because I'm not filling the differentials. I'm just going to grease this, and I'll probably put some gear oil in the differentials if I feel particularly adventurous, but the tranny is the last thing we really need to check. And added bonus, it'll give a chance for the oil to kind of go back down in the crankcase, and I'll probably top that off too. So nothing fancy for filling the transmission. We just come up here and we move that, and we move this. Hang on. Get all of our treasures. We peel back this piece of carpet, which needs to have the bucket on it. Hang on. Hold that carpet for a second. There we go. And pull that right back there. Give me a second. That right there is the transmission fill. Okay? This is for the hydraulic tank. So this sucks to get at, obviously. But we need to fill it and make sure that it's good because we don't want to burn the tranny up. I'm not too worried about it right now because it was running 4 gallons low for like 2 years and it didn't blow up. So it's a pretty tough transmission, but while it's level and we're doing a spring service, we might as well fill it up. So the best way I found to get to it is just a thin, like a transmission funnel, and take your time pouring your fluid in, and it helps if you have a second guy to watch and see if stuff's pouring on the ground. But if you pour a little bit of oil on the ground, no one cares except the occasional tree hugger. But I promise you, whatever oil I spill, there's going to be grass there in a few months. So I'll get all that done. We'll back it up to the shop, and I'll show you what all to grease, because some of it's obvious. Most of the hard stuff is underneath, though. All right, transmission filled, crankcase filled, hydraulic reservoir filled, it was low, and brand new coolant at that many hours. Oh, look at that, nice and even. All right, well, That'll look good in the record book. So we'll go ahead and back this up to the shop. And there we go. That should be just fine as long as no one takes it out of gear. And if it does roll, it's not going to roll very far. So I will... I mean, that's not like level or anything, but I think Dad's going to come out after lunch and we'll fix up the remote bar too. But this will let me get underneath it at least and grease pretty much everything and put some oil in the differentials. Okay, so what you see here is gear oil. 80/90 is what this Versatile likes in the differential and the planetaries. Now, the planetaries are kind of a pain to check, and I'll show you why here in a second. But the differentials, they leak, okay? Gasp. Who would have thought a differential on a 50-year-old tractor would be leaking? It leaks at the wheel seals, and it leaks at the pinion seal, okay? So... could we take all that apart and reseal it? Absolutely, but that's a lot of work for us to do, and we don't have time to do it because that's our only tractor. And even though budget flexibility has increased this year, it is still, the time factor is messing with us. So in traditional farmer solutions to basic problems, instead of resealing it and stopping it from leaking, we just put more fluid in it. And normally I would put probably double the amount you see here in the tractor, but we don't have that much on hand. And when the local Orscheln was transitioning to the Tractor Supply, there was a lot of stuff that we couldn't get, and we just didn't stock up because we just didn't. I don't really have a good excuse. We'll have to get some more later, but for now this will help. But because it leaks at the wheel seals and because it leaks everywhere, I'm not interested in filling it to the brim because it's just going to pour out faster. So we're just putting the bare minimum in to stop the differentials from eating itself alive, and we'll be fine. Now for grease, because there's like a million grease zerts on this thing, we're just using the all-purpose lithium grease, okay? And this was just, when we needed grease, this is what was left at Orscheln. Literally, this was the last thing on the shelf, and we got a whole case of it. Before this, I used just high-temperature grease. It doesn't matter what grease you use, really. Just use a grease and grease things regularly. So that's what we're going to put in this. And I'm mentioning all this because people are going to ask, and some people are going to throw a fit, like, oh, if you put that in there, you'll ruin your differential. Yeah, shut up, okay? That's really all I have to say to you. Now, here we have the planetaries, and as you can see, oil level. Well, the problem is with that is that you have to get each one of those relatively even before you can pull that plug and check them. And we need to, because we never have, to be honest. And yeah, we really need to. But that's kind of a two-man job, you know, and we need to be on a flat level surface, which this is not a flat level surface, okay? So the planetaries take 80/90. It's just a level plug. The other plug there is a drain, obviously. So I'm going to crawl underneath here, and I'll show you guys as much as I can for underneath. I assume you know how to grease stuff. Now, It's a lot easier if you have one of those automatic grease guns. But if you're like us and you're a little old school, you got to use that. So your external grease zerts that you can essentially get standing up are going to be your frame pivots on each side, your hydraulic cylinder pivots on each side. You're going to have a upper and lower center pivot. You're going to have, there's a grease fitting back here. There's one there. This one I need to get cleaned because it will not take grease. In the rear, if I can get you in there where you can see, you've got your universal joint. That needs to be greased. There are also grease zerts right here, or there should be, on each side for the hydraulic cylinder. There are supposed to be grease fittings for the wheel seals, but if your wheel seals are gone and they're leaking, then I don't think greasing them is going to help. Couldn't hurt, but it's not going to help too much. And then there's also, well, you can't see it. I'll show you when I crawl underneath on the front. But you will want to get all of those. There are grease hoses here. This is those are really all the big ones that you need to get. The frame where the tractor articulates, there's about 10 in there. And then most of the others you need to get are drive shaft U-joints. And they don't need a ton, generally, but they will need some because, I mean, they do spin. And especially if they're kind of getting worn out and the seals have dried up and they're a little cracked, or if you pop them a couple times, then you have to keep putting grease through them to keep fresh grease pushing dirt away from those surfaces so that dirt doesn't get in there. These back here will take a lot. Grease these until you see grease coming out somewhere, because I imagine by the time you get your Versatile 800, it is a little less than brand new. This has 5,000 hours on it, so yeah, it's a little worn. Some of these are kind of hard to get at. I will admit, having a good end on your grease gun helps. And just, you know, just crawl under there and grease it. It's really all there is to it. But I'll go underneath and I'll kind of show you what you're looking at for drive shafts on the front, because there's a couple of them, and kind of a little technique to get at them, because it is kind of a pain. Okay, here we are underneath the machine, and the camera might go a little crazy. I'm going to do my best to point stuff out to you. So right here is your front axle. There's the fill, obviously. Rule of thumb for filling axles, just on pretty much anything, if you can stick your finger in through the fill hole and feel oil down in there, it's probably fine. Like if you can dip your finger into a little puddle of oil, it's most likely fine. This axle is obviously going to hold way more than I've got on hand, but we'll get a couple of buckets and I'll fill it up proper later. It's not going to run that hard. If we were going to do nothing but plow with it, I'd be a little more concerned, but it's not going to run that hard. I'm not too worried. And I'll probably scrape off the buildup from the leaking axle seal. So, like I said, there is supposed to be a grease zert on the axle seal so that you're supposed to hit, but once your seal blows out that bad, it's probably not going to make any difference. Now, you may notice the other side's fine. Another reason your axle seals may blow out, and this is how I know that the one is bad, because this one's not leaking. Usually there's a breather that will cake with crud, and it'll stop the axle from being able to breathe, and those vapors will build pressure up in there, and they'll blow the seal out, and then oil will leak, which is of course bad. So you want to make sure you clean your breather while you're under here. Of course, you have this drive line, and then you've got an upper drive line. Sorry, I'm trying not to keep the camera in one position so it doesn't go nuts, but you'll want to grease that drive line. And you want to grease this drive line. You have 2 grease fittings there. I believe that is for the clutch linkage, like the yoke. And then, so while we're under here, what else? So, all right, I mentioned that guy I was emailing, and he was asking questions about the tractor because he's familiar with the engine, not so much the tractor. And he suggested a video on the shift linkage and stuff, and that's a good idea. I might do that one day, but for right now, I'll throw it in this video. This right here is your range shift linkage, okay? And then all the way back up in there, that is your shift, your main shift linkage. So if you want to adjust any of that, you need to pull that carpet back and get in there, and these rods are threaded and you can work them in, but you also would then have to disconnect them from the transmission right there, okay? That right there is your transmission filter, by the way, and that on top is your transmission pressure sensor. So that light that goes on and off in the cab, let me sit up here a little bit. That light that goes on and off, the transmission oil pressure light, when that light is on, that means there's no pressurized oil going to the transmission. So when the clutch is out, when it's engaged, when the tractor's moving, that light needs to be off. And if that light is still on, that's bad. It could be that the sensor's bad, but if you're like me, you probably just didn't put enough oil in it. And I wasted a lot of time last year replacing the transmission oil pump right there for absolutely no reason. So just on that, your transmission oil pump is up here. That is your suction line from the bottom of the transmission. This goes out to the transmission cooler, follows and goes over to the transmission cooler. So this is your brake disc, of course, with your caliper. The master cylinder is underneath the dash. So, like the steering console, there's a panel on top of it that has like 3 or 4 screws, 2 on each side. You take those out, you can pull that panel off, and you can access the master cylinder for everything. Now, let me see here. Okay, now there are a couple of Element hydraulic filters. I think this is one. I know this is one, and I'm trying to look around. There might just be one. I thought there were 2 or no, there is more than one, because one's right here and one is up there. Now, if I remember the manual correctly, what it said was that one of those is a replaceable cartridge, and I actually have one in the shop. I'm not going to do that today. And the other one should be a series of really fine mesh screens, okay? And they should be serviced. I don't remember what the service interval is. The guy at Helten Farm Repair, and Helten is the go-to source for versatile information. They know their stuff. But the guy there said that you hardly ever have to replace those filters unless you have like a massive hydraulic system failure where there would be, you know, like metal pieces or just lots of debris. He said generally if you keep your system fairly clean, the disposable spin-on filters will be more than enough. So that should cover most everything in this area. And then you also have, before I forget, crawl out from under here, right up there is your hydraulic filter, okay? And of course, right there's your oil filter. So, if I remember, I will put part numbers for the spin-on filters down below, and there will be Baldwin numbers, but that'll give you something you can cross-reference if you don't like Baldwin. And you can do things differently if you so choose, but that should cover most of the main points of greasing this thing. Just your output, your engine output shaft / transmission input shaft, your forward drive shaft, your clutch linkage, and then same thing in the rear. When you check your axle, make sure that your breather is clean. If you want to try and find the grease dirt and grease the axle seals, it couldn't hurt. But if it's like this, it's probably so far gone that grease isn't really going to help it. So, you know, and it's kind of a process to pull the wheel off and replace all that. So, it looks like there's a lot of room under here, and there is, and yet there also isn't. So I'm going to get all this greased. I'll do the rear end too. And if there's anything else I forgot, we will go over that in the next segment. So I'm going to get to work on this. Okay, after action report, got the front done, got the rear done. Now, even though the tractor is facing downhill, this rear differential was full of oil. So if it was sitting level, it would have an acceptable amount in it. And I think I'm actually getting ahead of the leaks. I might be getting the leaks to slow down a little bit, whichever one is correct, because I didn't have to add anything to this, which I spun the street elbow off to check it. So again, if it had been level, I would have felt fluid in there, probably would have left it alone. So this one's not as bad as I thought it was. And that front one, 5 quarts, I mean, it damn near filled that up to an acceptable level. So I'm going to say we're safe and nothing's been damaged over the years. Usually I add a lot more gear oil than that, but I think I might be getting ahead of it, which is good. I also cleaned the front inside dual because of, you know, all the gunk, probably about a layer that thick on there. I got a lot of it cleaned off. Greased the rear drive shaft. There's also 2 grease zerts back here for pivots. And we have everything in the center greased. Hang on. Did I miss? Oh, I did. Damn it. I missed the pivots back here for those hydraulic cylinders. I knew I was forgetting something. I may or may not get those. You just pretend I greased them. Okay? That's all you need to do. So, all of that's good. All of the critical stuff is greased here. Everything's full of oil. And we have good coolant in here. There is one more maintenance item that we need to do, and that is check the tie rods. So I will go get the appropriate wrench, and I will describe the procedure in more detail. Okay, so the reason that we check the tie rods, particularly the front ones, the back ones never had a problem with, but these front ones, okay, I already started this one off camera. The reason we check them is because, well, that's not attached, as you may notice. Oh, somebody thought it would be a really good idea to do that. Okay. So, yeah, anyway, sorry, I was getting distracted. You got to check these because that's the reason on the other side that dual is missing. The tire and rim are fine, but there was a point where it came off one time, okay? And we put it back on, we tightened the tie rods, and then we were supposed to be checking them, and we did for a little bit, and then we stopped. And then it came off again, and it ruined the spacer that's in here. So Dad is supposed to be calling a scrap yard or like a farm salvage yard's more accurate term, to see if they've got a spacer for this. I don't know if he's done it yet. But we're going to try and get that put back on this year. We keep meaning to do it every year, and then, you know, forget, run out of time, budget gets tight, whatever the excuse is. So on this, what I will do, because you'll notice that there's 4 of these and they're on one side, I'll either swap a couple of these around so that it's pulling more evenly, or I will get some of the old ones out of the shop that used to be on this, on the other side, and put them on. I think I've got a couple that are still good. But that's one of the things I don't like about the Versatile, is that this setup that they've got for duals is not the greatest. Pretty much everyone else did it better. They either bolted on a spacer and another wheel, or it was a slide on an extendable axle and they did it that way. Either way, it was kind of a better setup than this, because they just break off. They don't get loose, they just break off. Something to do with vibration, maybe? I don't know. But that's how it is. I shouldn't have said anything about the back, because this one right here was loose. And so I went to tighten it up. And what I have found is that, one second, well, I don't know if you guys can tell, but there's no threads left in that nut. I don't know, and I mean this, I do not know how you wear out a nut, but the threads on the rod are completely fine. I mean, in this area right here in particular, I could grab that nut and move it up and down. The threads are worn a little bit. So for comparison, this is what a good nut looks like. And that's what I took off of there. So that's junk. Now, it could be that the threads on this are worn down too, but I don't think so. I mean, I just don't. So I'm working on that. So I guess while I have the camera out, because I checked the rest of that rear tire, and it's fine. So let's check these here. Okay, and we'll show you live if they're any good. Yep, that's tight. That's tight. That's tight. And that one's good. And hang on, switch hands here. Yep, that one's good too. Okay, so all these are fine. So I guess 2 being bad isn't bad. But I'm going to throw a new nut and probably a new washer too on here. Put that back on the rear. And we should be good on the tie rod side, because trust me, it's no fun putting duals back on a Versatile. It is absolutely no fun at all. Much better. That should stay, but we will keep this in the tractor just in case. And probably at the end of each day when this thing's running, they will need to be checked diligently. At least once a day, probably after we're done running. And then after that, we'll have to check them just every now and again to make sure. But that is very important. And I really do think that there was a better way to do this. These back ones, I think, are a little bit better, but not by much. I just don't like the system. So with all that said and done, I think that will go ahead and conclude the spring service on the Versatile. It's all greased and oiled and watered and everything else, and we should be good to go. So next video you guys will be seeing on this probably have to do with the air conditioning. I don't know what we're going to do yet with it. So keep an eye out for that, I suppose. We need to get back to the property cleanup because, well, and we need to get to that. But, you know, there's all sorts of other stuff in between this being dealt with. The only other thing we will do, actually, is fix the remote bar. I don't remember that being quite so bent. But we have new bushings, new pipe nipples, and good remotes. So we'll get all that fixed. But that's not going to be in this video. This video was just the service of the Versatile, and we should be just fine. So now that should do it for this video. I really appreciate you guys sticking around. I hope that If you have a Versatile, this was a little informative for you and it helped out. I will leave part numbers for filters and stuff down below, but you can always go to the Baldwin Filters website and you can search by application and brand and make and model and everything, and they'll tell you what filters go on your machine depending on how it was built. But I'll put the spin-on filters, I'll put those part numbers down below, and you guys can do with that information what you want. If you need any additional help or if you have any additional questions, you can call Helten Farm Repair. I will put their information down below. You could also just leave a comment, or if you want to, you can send me an email if you need to send pictures. If you think I can help you out with your Versatile 800, I will certainly try, but I am far from an expert, just experienced on them a little bit. So, appreciate you guys watching. You take care, and I'll be back with something else in the future. See ya.